In today's video, I will be going over the various factors that contributed to both the failure of Rogue Lineage and the rise and success of Deepwoken. Make sure to subscribe, since only about 20% of the people watching right now are actually subscribed. And also, I'm currently streaming on Twitch right now, so come drop into this stream and come support me there. Now let's get into it. On the surface, Deepwoken and Rogue Lineage are both very similar games. They're permadeath or permanent death, progression-based PvP-focused games in which you decide your class or build based on a variety of factors involving their stats and playstyle. So why is Deepwoken on top while Rogue Lineage barely peaked at 10% of Deepwoken's max concurrent players? And why was Deepwoken able to reach such heights that Rogue Lineage couldn't? Well, let's start with the first difference between these games that earns Deepwoken positive attention: the progression systems. When comparing the primes of both of these games, a few things come to really differentiate their progression systems. First of all, and the biggest difference, is the PvP versus PvE difference that each game has. In Rogue Lineage, really the only way you can progress past your base class is by either jailing or killing other players based on your class's alignment. There used to be cheeses for this, like the way that you used to be able to burn zombie scrooms and doing like 4 sets of that would be the same as like 60 player grips, but these were patched out for, no real valid reason. However, in Deepwoken, your main form of progression is based on PvE and killing monsters with built-in patterns. Once you learn to fight a Sharko or a Golem or a Thresher, they never change, and that offers a sense of comfort and security in the game's consistent progression routes that you can always follow and pretty much always succeed in, guaranteed. In Rogue Lineage, however, this does not exist. With the need to kill players in a normal progression route, you don't have the consistency of monsters. A player can simply be better than you are, and you are harshly punished by Rogue Lineage's life system by losing to better players. In Deepwoken, dying once or twice doesn't really matter. You can easily escape the depths if you get drowned, and if you aren't max level, then leveling up for a quick life restore is extremely easy. Deepwoken is far more generous than Rogue Lineage, where in order to restore one of your 3 maximum lives, you need to find the exceedingly rare item, the Phoenix Down. You could also have 4 if you're, Casperin, but that doesn't really count because you're still down a life regardless if you die. There are only 3 chances in Rogue Lineage. In Deepwoken, you have 2 free buffer lives, and then you only wipe if you die in the depths, which, if you want to get more technical, going down to Layer 2 offers you a 4th chance at survival if you're capable of doing Layer 2 solo. And if you aren't, you could probably just pull up a YouTube guide, and even if you aren't somehow, it's not really that hard, because it's actually pretty well designed for new players. And most players can beat it at this point in the game's life, so it's really not much of a difficulty. Rogue Lineage's harsh live system, in combination with an inconsistent PvP-based progression system, meant that dying was an extremely common occurrence and was often not preventable if you were getting attacked by a larger group of players. This is especially apparent with moves like Pebble, which have infinite range and can combat tag you from anywhere, which means you just can get pebbled by someone from across the map and 3 people just dropped on you and you can't even fight back. However, while this sounds bad, it isn't entirely a negative. The problem with Deepwoken's PvP comes in 2 factors: the forgiving live system and Chime of Conflict. Chime of Conflict is a super structured environment which removes excess inconsistencies that you may find on an overworld map like monsters and cliffs and fall damage, which Rogue Lineage has a lot of fall damage, but all of this provides the most fair experience possible in any given fight. And both Chime of Conflict and the overworld of Deepwoken have massive safety nets, being the lives and skull system respectively. Rogue Lineage is overall a much more exciting game than Deepwoken. I have never felt the rush of fighting an unexpected 2v1 in Rogue Lineage that I have in Deepwoken, because Deepwoken lacks stakes when it's supposed to be a permadeath game. Regardless, this does make this game overall much more welcoming to players who are new to permadeath games, especially on ROBLOX, which is part of the reason why it's so much more popular, because much less people are going to rage quit and never touch the game again than in Rogue Lineage, where it's kind of impossible nowadays to fully solo progress regularly without some sort of alt account or boosting. In comparison to Deepwoken, Rogue Lineage is a much more hardcore experience, which brings me back to the progression's difficulty. In Deepwoken, progression is rather easy, with a solo progression for a build taking around 2 to 4 hours on average, I'd say. Back in Rogue Lineage's prime, the fastest possible solo semi-boosted progression route literally required waiting as a game mechanic. My ideal route back then would be get mana, wait an hour, train climb to max, get Sigil Helm, get a tome, but then ditch it for a dagger or cestus just because I want to learn the spells, wait for another 2 hours for day 3, spend 20 minutes moving my ult so I can can get Tomeless as a freshie, so I don't have to, you know, farm rots after I get all my kills. Get weapon experience at the zombie scrooms, go to Scroomville, grip my Scroom alt 60 times, which takes like 20 minutes, and then comes Silver. Silver is easily the biggest problem in all of Rogue Lineage. When I used to play the game, which I didn't really have a blacksmith, because when I played most of the time, blacksmith didn't exist. And even when it did come out and it did exist, I wasn't gonna waste time progressing one because that cost silver that I didn't have because I didn't have a blacksmith. But without a blacksmith, even after the skill costs were lowered to 350, it would still take around 10 hours of map farming to get enough silver for a max Oni, which is the class I play. And by the way, this is like the fastest methods too. Like you could server hop and go wherever you want to get all this silver, but it's still gonna take you like 10 hours of playtime and just unnecessary grinding. Not fun. And then on top of that, if you're like me and you also use Gaian, another like 2 to 3 hours for the silver for max armor. That means a normal player's progression without getting super boosted by like 15 people in a safe server was around 15 hours of playtime just to obtain your ultra class maxed out. And the funny thing is, you spend 15 hours to get your ultra class maxed out, but then you can lose a life in like 10 seconds because of faceless macro combos you after pebbling you from halfway across the map, and they're just faster than you. And then half the time they saw you through a wall because this game is just full of cheaters. And that's excluding stuff like artifacts. If you wanted to completely max out a build, you would need to get artifacts in Rogue Lineage, which come in the forms of weapons, armor, or just special abilities, or even races, which will give you special benefits. But they're super rare, and the best way to get them was through farming Castle Rock. Castle Rock, big dungeon, it can kill you, has good loot in it, but you know, 100 runs and you might get like 1 or 2 artifacts back when I was playing if you were lucky. Nowadays they're much more common, especially the Phoenix Downs, which give you lives. It's still really like, okay, all this stuff is way easier now, but nobody's really playing the game, so does it really matter? But pretty much, unless you were a YouTuber or part of a super good ultra house, you would spend on average like 15 hours to play the game for 30 minutes of actual playtime, unless you only played in private servers, which just isn't fun. And then putting artifacts on top of that, you spend even more time, and now there's even more risk to you dying, so it's just like not worth the time ever. In Deepwoken, you spend like 2 hours to get literal days to weeks of straight playtime because of how easy it is to just not die in Deepwoken. It is so insanely easy to not wipe a build in Deepwoken. You get 3-4 chances depending on your playstyle if you just want to go into layer 2, and it's not hard. It's such an easy game in comparison to Rogue Lineage. But that's just because Rogue Lineage isn't a player-friendly game. If you don't have someone teaching you, then you pretty much won't be able to learn anything, and basically all of the knowledge in Rogue Lineage can be traced back to either a developer or a mod, because very few things were actually found out by the community. Most things were spread by YouTubers who would learn things from mods, and this is after the media ban, which I'll talk about later. Now, everything I've said may make Rogue Lineage sound like an absolutely awful game, and I know this video is kind of supposed to be on why Rogue Lineage is an awful game, but I promise you Prime Rogue Lineage was so much better than Prime Deepwoken. First of all, Rogue Lineage's map, in my opinion, is just so much more charming than Deepwoken's. Like, just actually everything is. All the NPCs have character, and many of them have pretty deep lore, like Big Haas and Dorgan the meat vendor. Yes, Dorgan the meat vendor who sells you food has a lot of lore behind him for some reason. You wanna know who doesn't? Lance Leshy. He's kind of a nerd. The map is actually just amazing. It's nowhere near as large as Deepwoken's, but every place in it has so much more memories, and it's much more memorable than Deepwoken's map. Like, what's the last memory you actually had in Etris? Yeah, it was probably pretty mid. You probably just ran through it to go anywhere else. The last memory I have in Orsfall was from like 5 years ago, and I remember it quite distinctly. For those of you wondering, I was getting my Cestus double enchanted with Opal and Flame to counter the Elder Vamp meta, and I got pulled up on by a Hoppa Snarf mage, and I got shit on. Not a great memory, but looking back at it, it was still funnier than anything in Deepwoken that isn't a glitch. Like, yeah, people getting flung and banned is funny, but that's not supposed to happen. Rogue Lineage just had better interactions, even if the community was terrible. Also, it might just be me, but Deepwoken just looks so washed out in comparison to Rogue Lineage. Every environment in Rogue Lineage is vibrant and has beautiful ambience. And yeah, most of the music is stolen from other games like Zelda, but it's still nice. The hidden forest is shrouded by a thick green mist, which hides everything within it. Sentinel is bright and feels hot, with the only bits of shade being the inner sides of the city. Horsefall feels industrial with the sounds of anvil hammers in the background. And Tundra is its own mysterious wasteland, which kills all those who enter it unprepared. The coolest place in Deepwoken is Layer 2, and even that's just kind of bootleg Tundra. It's also just way easier than Tundra and has like a fourth as much content in the first layer, and even in the second layer, which yeah, Layer 2 Floor 2 is cool, but it's kind of just a glorified boss arena maze because all that's down there is Aetheron. And even when comparing the lore, Rogue Lineage is honestly better. Like, Rogue Lineage actually has competent lore. Even if most of it is hidden, the little lore and story within Rogue Lineage is kind of just more sensible than Deepwoken, which has communist-laced oceans sinking islands of people because of their greed and thirst for power, because they wanted to control the oceans. Like, really think about that and just, like, let that sink in. But anyway, Rogue Lineage's media ban also added to the magical feeling that the game had. Since on release it was really mysterious, and it had the amazing feeling of discovery whenever you found something cool or new, or you made the tiniest bit of progress because you got 7 silver and bought some bad armor. In Deepwoken, the pinnacle of progression at the time, bells, were leaked a week into the game's release, and all the progression info was leaked before the game even dropped by like a day because of Seiji4 trying to make a video on it for his house to watch, for him to then publish it after for views. Really fun when you guys kind of ruin the entire point of exploration-based games because the devs didn't put a media ban in. And I hate whenever I talk about this and people say, oh, but a media ban wouldn't work because people just wouldn't do it. Like, I hate that point because no, it would definitely work. There would be minimal content on YouTube, and the only videos on YouTube would have like 20 views, and they wouldn't be anything special. People say nobody would like obey the media ban, like people didn't do it for Rogue Lineage. Like, I know Rogue Lineage doesn't have as many players, but you're telling me 2,000 to 5,000 people were playing Rogue Lineage back then, and all of them were pretty much respected a media ban and only posted private clips? The media ban would have been just as effective for Deepwoken. Maybe a little bit less due to the just absolute sheer amount of people, but it wouldn't have been like just completely ignored, okay? So I hate when people make up that stupid point. Up next would be the PvP and PvE systems, which I want to talk about in a bit more detail. First of all, obvious differences first, like last time. Deepwoken has way more PvE than Rogue Lineage. Rogue Lineage has like 3 monsters in Gaia and 1 or 2 bosses, which are the Lava Snake and the Ice Dragon Serpent thing, I forget what it's called. And then in K, every monster is some overpowered bullshit that you can barely fight alone. And if you remember the old corrupted mages, well, you'd wish that you didn't, because they were just unfair, unfun, and boring to fight against. Most of the monsters in Rogue Lineage were either farming fuel, like the zombie scrooms, which were meant to be used for weapon experience, so they're basically invalid after the first 30 minutes of your hunt progression. And the rest of the monsters in Gaia are the Howlers, which were wolves, which hunt in packs of 5 and jump you, which are really only fought by cheesing them against a ledge to get their fangs, which is for the Sigil Helm quest. But the fact that you have to cheese them really says a lot, especially because the next enemy are the Evil Eyes, which pretty much can't be fought due to the insanity they give you, which insanity in this game is just deadly. Shriekers, which are just basic spawn enemies, but they also have the capability of infinite comboing you in groups of 2 or more, balanced. And the Ice Dragon, which is somehow both the needed boss requirement for the Dragon Slayers, but they also can't be killed normally by a single person without cheesing it. Deepwoken has well thought out enemies with learnable patterns and mix-ups and consistent gameplay. Rogue Lineage is not a game for people who enjoy PvE because it's all done terribly. All the monsters are either like broken and can infinite combo or one-shot you, or just way too strong overall, or they're basically useless and are only used for the first 10 minutes of progression, which is just the zombie screams. Every other monster in the game is broken in some way, which in itself lowers the amount of people that Rogue Lineage compares to in comparison to Deepwoken, because a lot of people play Deepwoken just for the PvE. The PvP is also an entirely different system as Rogue Lineage, which functions on mini-stun combat. For example, real quick, Deepwoken is non-stun combat. This means that usually getting hit by a move is the punishment for getting hit by that move, and basically nothing in the game is a true combo. Mini-stun means that most things can't true combo, but many things do. An M1, for example, will go into any move guaranteed in Rogue Lineage. But also there's gaps between the M1s that allow you to escape sometimes. See, that's the mini stun, which separates it from the true stun. Because, you know, true stun is little baby garbage that's for kids. Yeah, it caters towards kids most of the time. Regardless, this is a big difference because it makes the games completely different. Non-stun combat takes skill and can appeal to everyone. Mini-stun combat is generally the hardest to grasp since there's a lot of smaller interactions you need to learn. For example, a quick example of this would be the Shadow Fan into lethality combo. It's hard to do, but once you get it down, you should usually have it down. But it is a combo that you can do in the game. Deepwoken doesn't really have tech like that. But I do feel as if the combat in Rogue Lineage is much more satisfying than Deepwoken simply for the fact that combos and tech like the Shadow Fan lethality exist, and landing them feels amazing. And while there is move stacking in the game, it's not really poorly done. I guess in terms of macro combos, which have also kind of just ruined the game, yeah, it's definitely poorly done, but it's nowhere near as bad as things could be. If macros didn't overtake most of the people in the game in Rogue Lineage, then the game would still be a lot of fun to play. The only reason why I don't play it is because macros just kind of ruin it. But when we really view both games, Deepwoken was always going to do better than Rogue Lineage. Rogue Lineage simply provided the funding needed for the devs to make Deepwoken. That's why Rogue Lineage was more expensive than Deepwoken. Like, actually, the game costs more than Deepwoken. The game was never made to last, though. It was made for Deepwoken. Deepwoken is cheaper, easier, more accessible, it's higher quality, and has much more work put into it than Rogue Lineage. Realistically, Rogue Lineage can be condensed into classes, NPCs which teach you the classes, and a map. Deepwoken has full build diversity and control that allows for creativity, a bunch of bosses and monsters to fight, a massive map when compared to Rogue Lineage, in fact, 3 massive maps compared to Rogue Lineage's 2 small to medium-sized maps, and a whole lot more work put into it as a whole. The game even gets weekly updates, which Rogue Lineage in its prime wasn't getting weekly updates. Rogue Lineage had like 4 or 5 big updates in total, and I guess they were integrating new classes on release, but more than likely they were already made and they were just being integrated through the NPCs and locations in order to get people to look for them, which I know this for a fact because back in the Rogue Lineage days, whenever a class's like NPC location would get leaked, they would just move it. Like, they would actually just move the location if it got put on YouTube or something. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Shout out to Kenix, Jake, Cyberboy21, and Drizzy Drake fan. I love you all. You can probably hear in my voice that I am a little bit sore from being sick. I love you all, and goodbye.